Hello from Sweden. It's a glorious morning as I look out here across the water towards Stockholm. It's a bright sunny morning and the reds and the oranges and the yellows of the architecture are popping out at me. A truly glorious morning, though perhaps I am a bit biased being half Swedish. I've actually not come over here to take in the view. I've come over to train a group of anchors and reporters at our affiliate network. And I'm sure at some point during our discussions they'll bring up the subject of clout. And the title of this podcast is Clout is the New Influence. And I want you to take a moment, if you would, to consider the people who you know who have clout. They're the ones who can walk into the room and really own it. They're just as likely to appear in your social group as they are at work. Clout is clout wherever you find it. And you don't need to like people who have clout. You just need to respect them. They often just seem to get what they want out of life, and perhaps deep down you'd like a bit of that clout for yourself. Now, you can probably name the people in your world who have this rare and elusive quality on one hand, and they'll come to you straight away as well. But if I asked you to name the people in your world who have influence, then I suspect you'll need more time to think about it, and that the list would end up being a lot longer. And that, for me, is the difference between clout and influence. Clout is something that hits you in the gut. It's pretty hard to define, but when it's there, you can't deny it either. Someone either has it or they haven't. Influence is more fluid. Most people have some, although you can't always be sure. You need to weigh up how much power they have and then how they exert it too. One of the great privileges of my job is that I get to meet powerful and undoubtedly influential people most days. They're the business and political and cultural leaders of our time, and the commentators who make sense of the world that we live in. Now, I don't usually spend much time analysing them in any detail, but I do know when I've met someone with clout, because they stick in my mind. Steve Jobs, the Queen, the rapper Stormzy. They're all people I remember meeting. I also remember what they said, what the weather was like, and crucially, how they made me feel. What's interesting is that you can't categorize any of these people into any particular social group or personality type. They don't have to share the same background or upbringing either. But they picked up their clout somewhere along the way, and that's why I think it's something that can be learned. Now, the reason clout is hard to define is because we react instinctively to it. You don't need to think about it. It is influence, but it's also about the power of attraction, and that's what makes it distinct and particularly potent. Now, we often hear about charisma, we talk about charisma, and perhaps some people are born with that. But you've got to know how to use it for a start, and I think you can develop your own magnetism anyway, simply by showing a passion for something that you genuinely care about. Perhaps it's better to think of charisma then as infectious enthusiasm. Steve Jobs is a classic case in point. He dedicated his professional life to what he called the information revolution, and he was so convinced by it that he convinced everyone around him too. And if you can dedicate yourself to a cause like that, then I think you're on your way to building your own clout. Now, clout is the new influence because we're living in a particularly emotionally driven era. You see it in our politics, you see it in our media. We're bombarded with messages every minute of the day, and we're forced to rely on our instincts to filter out what we need to hear from what we don't. As a result, we gravitate towards what feels most honest and true, and that's a habit that anyone brought up in the digital age has had to pick up. Now, when I finally revealed the title of my book, It's All About Clout, shortly before publication, I was surprised how many millennials actually picked up on it. I was told I was on point. It turns out clout was already a thing for them. A clout chaser is now part of their slang, as defined by the Urban Dictionary, as a person that only hangs with certain people or starts beef with people to gain popularity. Don't mess with him, it says. He's a clout chaser. Now, that entry was made a few months after I started writing, so I was more on point than I could ever have imagined. But the helpful thing about that was that it reassured me that I was onto something with this book and this blog. To stand out these days, you have to have clout. influence on its own just isn't going to cut it. Knowing how to attract an audience is as important as knowing how to convince them when you get in front of them. That's it for now. Goodbye from Stockholm.